Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah. So I can skip the first slide due to the generous introduction. Sorry, that was one too much. As Mushon said, my name is Moritz Stefaner. I work as a truth and beauty operator. That's my official job title. That's one of the perks when you're self-employed. So I work alone, always in teams, but we're all freelance and we organize per project. And yeah, the type of work I do really ranges from very clean analytic design to high-end interactive experiences. Sometimes I also play a bit with data art and try to push the boundaries of what's possible in data visualization. I also run a podcast together with Enrico Bertini, who spoke here 2 years ago, actually. So that's 3 years ago. This is a nice connection. And we publish a new episode every 2 weeks or so, and we talk about data and the role it plays in our lives. And Mushon has been a guest as well, another connection. So it's kind of nice. So, any listeners out there? Anybody familiar? Yes? Ah, very good. You're my people. Very good. So, so I'll just give you some idea of what I've been working on and then go into 2 projects more in detail. So the first one is also a branding exercise in a way, because it was a project for the OECD. OECD is typically known for putting out really big books with lots of tables and bar charts and heavy statistics. And for this project, they wanted to try something new, so they commissioned the Berlin-based company Raureif and me to develop a new visual for the new Better Life Index. And the idea of the Better Life Index is that you can look at many things in a country, not just income or jobs or education rankings as they usually do, but there's also softer and maybe more human things to look at, like health and life satisfaction. And so we came up with this flower visualization that expresses all these different multidimensional ideas at once in one glyph, in one combined visual. And that's the first thing, it's like multidimensional, so there's many things you can look at once. The second important part was that it's subjective and also interactive. So instead of prescribing a fixed ranking, as they would have done in the past, on this side, the users have the chance to say, okay, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I find important. So for instance, if you prioritize civic engagement, then Sweden and Australia rise to the top of this ranking. And if you put income into the mix, then United States starts to catch up, and so on. And so instead of prescribing what to think about the data, OECD opens up in a sense and says like, okay, maybe there's different perspectives we can represent here, right? And the interesting thing is it started as a small data visualization project, but became a symbol for the whole way of thinking, basically. And this flower visualization became a logo for this whole idea behind the initiative. And I think that's quite interesting that such a unique data visualization can play this communicative role and become an iconic representation of an idea, basically. By the way, Israel is also doing quite good, so especially in health and life satisfaction, could be improved environment and civic engagement, according to the OECD. So take it with a grain of salt, but you can look up Israel's data there as well. I also work a lot with scientists, so just as a symbol of that, here's Project UCO. It's a project I've been working on to provide an in-depth dive into the world of wind forecasts. So this is seasonal wind predictions all around the world, and we show 51 different models of how the wind could turn out next winter, next fall, at 100,000 spots around the world. So it's a very data-heavy exploration platform for scientists to make sense of these huge amounts of data. And because it's about the future, so we had this problem with like non-factual data, made-up data maybe, we came up with this cone visualization to basically show it's a projection. So I tend to think a lot about the metaphor and the mental model that people have when they look at a visual. Another interesting connection to the talk before, so this is a project using Google Trends data, and we took a specific angle on this data set and looked at what people search for on Google related to food. So are there any interesting patterns in how people search for food? Of course, you can look at typical trends like veganism or cocktails, or fat-free is actually going down, but then the whole superfood is going up, and so on. But we were especially interested, are there interesting patterns over the year? And so we plotted all the data on this sort of year clock, more or less, to see if maybe this type of food has a peak in summer, but also in winter, right? And so what are the typical seasonal patterns attached to different ingredients or recipes and so on? Yeah, so you can see some of them here. Soup obviously has the peak in winter in the United States, so it's all United States-based data. If you do it all around the world, you might get different results, of course. But it also has a dip in December. So, you know, people will say, of course, people eat soup in winter, but why does it have a dip in December? So you can start to hypothesize a bit why this is the case or not. And yeah, rhubarb has a very clearly defined season, right? And other foods like, smoothies and chia seeds, they're basically spiraling out of control because they're like these trend foods that are super popular right now. You know? Some charts have special characteristics, and this one actually looks like the food itself. So we have a whole category on the side for charts that look like the food they describe in gefilte fishes, which is kind of funny. And it's obviously the Passover peak here in April. Yeah, yeah, it's a nice one. Yeah. And food is a topic I'm sort of interested in anyways, and we even took it one step further, not just talk about food in graphics, but we even use food to express data in our data cuisine workshops. I do that together with Susanne Jaschko from Berlin. And we basically travel around the world and use local data to express local statistics in local food together with people. And so for instance, in Belgium, we did one bit dark a dish that represents the typical causes of death in Belgium, and basically the amount of pralines that are filled with a specific death, they represent the probability that you might die of cancer or other sources, and everybody could pick one, right? So you never know what you get, basically. It's a very visceral way, I think, to represent quite serious statistics. Yeah. But they're sweet, so it's bittersweet, I guess. And these visualizations, of course, it's on the border of what makes sense in many cases. It's very, lots of work for very little data that's being transported. But again, talking about memorability, once you ate that praline, you're not going to forget what you had, right? And so it's a very small data set, but that goes very deep and is also remembered very deeply. And I think that's very interesting contrast to this big data and everything's transient. This one's very small data and we spent a whole weekend cooking it, basically. That's an interesting contrast there. Anyway, so this is just an overview. This is all going great and great fun. But these are mostly, as you have seen, communicative projects, mostly aimed at general public, a bit entertaining, like an interesting spin on data. And I do this a lot, and I could do this forever, no problem. But somehow, I think there's still something we need to take it further and go further. And I wrote an article roughly a year ago on Medium about data visualization in the industry. And I called it There Be Dragons, because I think this type of ambitious, custom-crafted data visualization is still hasn't found its place in corporate industrial settings yet. And everybody's very excited in principle, but I don't see many people having a dedicated data visualization role at big companies, or any big companies doing really exciting work, if we compare it to what comes from big journalistic outlets or independent designers. And I think that's kind of interesting. And so, yeah, so I wrote, I think there's one nut we haven't been able to crack, which is anchoring bespoke data visualization, really crafted data visualization as a full-fledged profession in these corporate settings. And I do talk a lot to industry, especially in Germany, like the big companies, SAP, Siemens, and so on. And often, people face me with these questions that's all nice, and it's great that you are doing this, but for us, we're not sure, Maybe it's just a trend, or maybe it's not that useful, really. And we are fine with using standard tools, probably. Yeah, and I think today we have seen a few examples, actually, so maybe I should correct that part of the talk a bit. There can be good examples. A lot of it is maybe also behind closed doors and NDA'd, but still I think we can achieve more. And a lot I see in corporate context falls into roughly two categories. So the first one is this one. I'm sure many of you have seen these types of data representations where it's basically a number and then a chart around it, and it's all in panels. So it's basically this death by dashboard. And I like to call this number decoration. So basically somebody just came up with one way of measuring something, like one KPI. This is how good we are at X, right? And then basically you're just in the number, but it looks a bit dull, so you make a circle around it, right? Or you make it charty, yeah? And I think that's sort of a capitulation in terms of, okay, we don't even know what else to say here except that number, and we're just driven by that number. And I think that doesn't go far enough in terms of, we could do much more in data visualization. And it's a bit like you're interested in all the complexities and the whole forest, you know, and the birds and the trees, and you get this pre-chopped like piece of wood, basically. And so like, yeah, that's it, take it or leave it. And then, yeah, then when people complain, they're like, this doesn't go far enough, then we want everything, then you end up with interfaces like this, which is the dreaded data explorer, you know, where you can do anything, and you have all the drop-downs, and every mid-level manager has gotten their drop-down because they wanted this option, it becomes this sort of crazy data monster where you can do anything and nothing. Yeah? And so I call this one, here's all the data, good luck. Yeah? So you figure it out. You wanted this whole forest, now you have your forest. Right? And I think these are two ways of capitulating basically in front of this, what do we do with data? Like one is making it far too simple, the other one is just throwing it out there without any opinions or priorities, no design really. Just saying like, here's the data, you figure it out, right? And I think the alternative is really to craft data experiences, to provide interfaces to data that are really tied to a purpose and made for a purpose, that are opinionated also, where somebody said, I know we need to do it like this and not like this. So somebody developed a clear opinion what's important, but they are still open in terms of you can do something with them, you can be creative with them, you can work with them, and not just be presented with the end result of a machine, like the 5.2 score with a surgery. And so this is basically what I try to bring in these contexts. And to me, it has a lot to do with understanding both the users in a user-centered design process, which is obvious if you think about it, but also understanding the data. So you cannot design a data product without really understanding the data itself. You cannot work with data as a placeholder in your design. And one project where we tried to like put a positive example here and really make it work is called peak spotting. It's something we did for Deutsche Bahn, the German railway company. And it's really a high-end tool to allow in-house people to manage traffic better. And the challenge is, so the German train system is a bit peculiar in the sense you don't have to reserve tickets, you can just get on any train, even for the high-speed trains. So in France or so, you have to really book one seat in a train, like in an airplane, and when the train is full, there's no more tickets. In Germany, you can buy tickets and get on the train, and somehow it's part of the system and it should be like this, so we have to deal with it. And now the challenge is, a lot of the trains are very full. And you want to sort of steer people away from the full trains towards the less full ones, right? But it's a very soft management problem in a sense you cannot force them. So you have to work with prices or advice or warnings, and somehow, you know, steer these masses of passengers to the right spots. And to understand where to steer them, you need to understand how full the trains will be, right? And so the good news is they have really good predictive models of how full the trains will be. So they use all the fancy AI techniques, you know, and all the neural nets and random forests and so on. But what they don't have, or didn't have up to now, are proper tools to actually work with that data. And I see that quite a bit is like high-end technical solutions, but no human interface for that, right? And so, yeah, it's all basically just custom Excel lists, and they have to copy-paste from one tool to another and read all the numbers and construct in their mind the whole cognitive model of how these numbers play together, but it never comes together in an interface. Yeah, Christmas 2016, they went even so far, they were so desperate, so they started to print out different charts and then mark them with markers and plastered their walls with all the potential bottlenecks, and sort of went full analog again because they didn't have the right digital tools basically to work with all this data, which is sort of absurd. So what we did is basically take all this input, what they need, and turn it into a more direct and more like really effective data experience. And so we built this tool called peak spotting where you see a lot of days. So this is basically like a calendar weeks into the future, and you can see immediately like what are the most heavy, the days that have the highest passenger loads probably in the future, and then what can we do about them, or where exactly, and why is that the case? So here you see the summaries, and then you have more detailed visualizations, funnily very similar to these ancient path time diagrams that railway people love. They work really well. A very unique form of representation, or different like matrix views, and of course an animated map where all the like little thingies make particle trails. You have lots of filters and so on, and can basically understand a day in detail in all these different views, and then even go on the level and look at individual trains. So basically this is time running here for one train. You can see here it's becoming very full, and here it starts very full, but then it goes down. So it can really go on a very granular level, all to the individual like train legs, passengers. Very deep. So I'll just show you a video so you see the flow a bit. So first you inspect the days. There's extra annotations, like if we know something about the day, holidays are starting, or there's a big soccer match or something, which will show up here. Then you pick your different views. You can sort in different ways, filter in different ways. What's interesting, people love the list. So it's a visualized list, so it's okay with me, but this is the power tool, is still the list where you sort and group, regardless of all the fancy maps. Yeah, you don't have to understand everything in detail, it's just to get a general sense of what types of actions are available, what types of flows. I love this view visually. They don't use it at all. So there's this really interesting tension. Like in some views, they say they just have it up when visitors are around, so they can show off. But the power tools are really the list and the detail view. It's super interesting. Yeah. So this is the animated map, and they also said they never use it. But when somebody comes and wants to see what they are doing, they show up the animated map, and everyone's like, "Oh, that looks complex. So congratulations." But it's fine, you know. So it also plays a role. I mean, we still keep it in. So it's interesting to hear. Anyway, it's very custom, very powerful, lots of details, and it's being adopted really well. So we hope it's a good example. I can tell you a bit about the process of how software like this can be developed. The way I do it is I always ask for two things. One is goals and constraints, like why are we doing this and what do we want to achieve, when do I know if I'm successful, which is sometimes less clear than you might think, and it's good to write it down, especially if you're a freelancer. The other part is really having data from the start, because for me, as I said, designing a data product, you cannot do it on stickies. You cannot do it with a method that says number goes here or a fancy chart goes here. You need to have the actual data, and you need to really immerse yourself into that data set right from the start and really take a lot of different looks at the data and understand the structure, how full is it, how much does it change, are there any gaps, does it raise any questions, how would it look like if I make a map with all these, train lines, how does it feel? Because a lot of the actual design decisions you can only make once you have the real data. And in this project, we had an interesting back and forth because the client was very proficient using Tableau. Tableau is like a more generic visualization tool, but that still allows a few custom views. So some of our design ideas, they tested directly in Tableau with real data and used it in production straight away. So it didn't quite do what we wanted, but we could quickly test in principle if the idea works. And this was really important, both in acceptance, but also in understanding before we build an expensive thing, does it actually do what people want, right? The other part, I often also code myself, so I quickly make these really ugly, quick prototypes, but they're custom built in D3, and I can try out things that are not available in standard software, right? So this animated map would have been hard in any other tool. I knew I wanted to try it because animated particles are cool, so I built my own tools in D3, right? The other thing I start to think about is visual language in principle, like how can we talk about trains what are people interested in, and how could I encode, like what they use for length or areas or colors. This needs to make sense if we think about it in terms of the domain, like what I'm actually talking about. And so these are just basic ideas like, okay, we could use color to express our opinion about the data, but it's not a good thing to use color for the quantities because it's an imprecise measure, so we have to have a bit of a support in terms of another visual variable. So these early explorations are really about finding a good angle, finding really the right way into the project. I can only recommend to also doubt the data, like never trust the data you get, always assume something's wrong, there's something missing, somebody messed up, because it is always like that. Data is always faulty, and the quicker you find the faults in the data, the quicker you make progress. It can be a successful outcome of this exploration to also say the data you have doesn't support the use case. We need a different data set. And also, like a general advice also for managers, like give the project a chance to change directions. I've seen so many projects that are called globe or dashboard, and then people think it has to be like that. It has to be the dashboard. But that was just the project working time, right? So be open in terms of representation. Don't insist it has to be the globe now, and now everybody has to do 3D things. Yeah, and anyway, so this prototyping is really important to me, and the advantage is really, very early if something is actually interesting. Like not just potentially interesting, but actually interesting. And in my experience, it can take half of the project time actually to just figure out roughly what you're doing, which might make a few clients nervous, but then you actually know you're on the right track in all the other phases. Then you go more into traditional design. When you have that basic direction, you can think about, okay, what's the information architecture? Like, how do these different views relate to each other? Like, what do people do where? Why would they navigate from here to there? Like, how do all these basic ideas go together in a user flow? We always code a lot different alternatives. So if we have the basic framework, we can quickly try, is it better to use this type of representation or this? Because if you have it running in code, you can quickly, with real data, sketch these alternatives and test them with users. And a lot of the work here was really just plain UI design, like how do we do these filters, how can we enable actions, and this is not really data visualization anymore, but it's super important to just make it work for the end users as well. And then you can really jump into production, then it becomes much more traditional. So I think these first two phases are really unique to data visualization projects. Production, if you know what you're doing, it's very similar to software development in general. What is often forgotten, what we also neglected a bit in this project, is this whole topic of help and onboarding and how do we guide users to doing the right things. And it's all this extra work that needs to go around the visualization, also to promote it in-house, to maybe make a small video, a good help system, all these things. That can be a lot of work, and in this case we're now catching up with this. What we do quite well actually is visualize and analyze the actual user behavior. So we have little internal dashboards where we track how many hours do people spend per day, how many users. So we have a really good eye on what people do with the software. And we actually built a little session explorer, another custom visualization that shows us which actions people take in the software. And we're now able to talk about different user groups, like somebody here who's using filters a lot and a lot of hover interaction, quick navigation between trains. And there's other users that use a lot of search. So here's somebody who doesn't use the whole navigation, but just enters through search. So we can talk about different user groups, really, and understand how they actually use the software and sort of watch what they're doing. We also visualized which features are actually being used, and as you expect, probably, it's just a fraction of, the white parts are all unused features by individual users. So a lot of the features are actually not being used. It's sometimes a bit depressing, but it's to some degree also to be expected. And I think this is super interesting, and this is also, we have the chance now to actually watch people use the software and take that as a new data input into the next design phases, right? And so many projects are just one-offs. But what we try to do is really establish this iterative method where we watch people do something, see how that changes how we think about the project, and keep going. So just for this project, main takeaways, I guess, are this idea that you need to design based on data and user-centric, in a user-centric way. There's a tension there, but you need to somehow bring both together. And I think what's unique to the process here is this idea that visualization can help you through all the whole way, like exploring the data, understanding your users, building prototypes, rolling out the product, but then also visualizing even how people use it. So once you have a good visualization toolkit together, you can use it along the whole design process, right? And I think what's most interesting here is at the sweet spot of what visualization can do, because we have a lot of data, high-end data, but at the same time the task is so fuzzy and needs so much intuition and understanding that you could not automate the decisions people make, right? And this is exactly the sweet spot where visualization can play such an important role. Because if it was clear how to adjust the prices and which warnings to get, you could just build an automatic system, right? But it's so complicated that you need people in the loop, but they need to be fully informed. So I think it's also important to identify exactly these cases where it actually works, right? So that's one project. Here's another one I'm now working on, so it's work in progress. It's called Multiplicity. It takes a totally different direction, much less applied, much more artistic, but also related to machine learning. So I think it's kind of interesting. And it's sort of an exploration of, can we find a visual representation of a city based on the photographs people take? So this is project from Shohei Nishino. He's a Japanese artist, and he does these photo collages. He calls them diorama maps. And what he does is he goes through the city, takes thousands of images, and then reassembles them to create this city image that's basically a portrait of the city based on his photos. Yeah? And so you can see here, these are all individual little photos, and together they assemble his idea of San Francisco in this case. And he did it for like 20 cities, so the guy is obsessed, clearly. So I was wondering, can we maybe draw a portrait of the city as seen through the lens of thousands of photographers, right? So we have all these images of cities online. I was like, maybe we can do something computationally and like bring it all together. This could be super exciting. And so I basically pulled a lot of images from Instagram about Paris, because it's also for an exhibition in Paris. And I put them on a map, and I was like, wow, this is a mess. This is not good. This is not going so well. So I was like, this could be harder than I thought. I started like scaling them by likes or trying to clean it up, but it's super difficult. It's just a big mess. So I was like, maybe, we have computers, so they can help us maybe clean up this mess. And so now I'm doing similarity-based maps that are based on what a neural network thinks are similar images. So we have now these pre-trained neural nets that are optimized for classifying. Is there a dog on the image, or a car, or something like this? But we can also use them to judge how similar images are, and we have techniques to make 2D maps. So what I'm now doing is basically do these similarity clouds, more or less, where a lot of similar photos, like here's food, and here's, I think, more the buildings and the Eiffel Tower and so on, go together. And so I built this, I'm currently working on this interactive installation where you have that big cloud, and that's the overall portrait of the city, and you can zoom in, and then you start to see, it's all individual photos, that's cool. And then you see how it's basically assembled as a whole. So I'm still working on this, just a rough prototype. The idea is to have a touchpad here, and then you can navigate a bit like with a joystick or zoom to individual like points in that cloud. Yeah. Anyway, so the interesting part is really this like zooming between all these different layers. So you have here this big overview, very crowded, but you still see some overall pattern, and then this intermediate view. And then on the bottom level, you see a lot of really, really similar images. And I was like, this is cool. So let me see if I can find more of these really tight, super similar clusters. And there's a lot of them, actually. So here's all the Eiffel Tower shots, right? So everybody needs to take a picture of the Eiffel Tower. Here's more the graphic design stuff. There's one wall, like a wall of love, where there's in all languages. I think it says "I love you" or something like this. So everybody needs to take a picture here. And yeah, building by Monet that everybody photographed. So I became interested in these like very cliche like reinterpretations of the same motif, basically. And there's lots of them. So, all the hair. Or all the poses. So it's interesting like how well the neural net picks up on what we find really similar images in the end. And this has really changed. Like a few years ago, I couldn't have done this, basically. And you could say, oh, it's just all the tattoos and so on. So lots of micro images. And you could say, yeah, it's just the algorithm, so what's your contribution, Moritz? And the interesting part is there is a lot of back and forth between me and the machine. So basically for these collages, what I do is I find an interesting cluster in the overview map that you have seen. But then I pick an image where I say like, yeah, this is the prototypical Eiffel Tower image. That's my human judgment. And then I feed it back to the machine and say like, give me all the images that are this similar. And then I tweak the parameters. So basically it's this back and forth between human judgment, automatic methods, that I find super interesting at the moment. And yeah, and also in this map you have seen, so I make these hand drawn annotations, also just to signal there is actually an author present. So we had this discussion about objectivity here, and of course it's a very subjective representation of Paris. And I try to signal this through the handwriting, just saying, like, yeah, there's a person present here. And where you see that the most, but which often disappears, like which data do I actually show? Like what's the selection process? So, and I ran a lot of different variations basically of what could be shown, like how many images and what's the selection criterion. Do I use, for instance, do I try to map the city spatially well so that all the points in the city are covered equally? Or do I go for just the tourists when I look at the travel hashtag, right? Or do I maybe use just a very random sample just to get a good sample of the overall image magnitude, but then you get a lot of Eiffel Tower stuff and food? Or do I optimize myself for these cliches that I found most interesting, right? Then you get a much sharper map. And all these decisions you don't see in the end. So, but yeah, what's the middle ground? I'm now really thinking about just making a custom blend and saying like, so I add 10 cliches and the 10,000 most liked images and the top 100 from each location, like really make a blend, like a good coffee, yeah, or a good tea. Because this is the curation work I do basically in selecting a good representation. And yeah, to me that has much more to do with portrayals basically and how we portray a city. Yeah? It's like an artistic exercise in a way. And I think there's always this interesting parallel that if there is a portrait that is hand-painted, handcrafted, everybody says, like, yeah, that's a subjective representation of that person or themselves. But if it's a photograph, it's an image of reality, right? Because there was photons hitting this photo paper, and it was an objective physical process that generated that portrait. So this one is objective, this one is subjective, right? But what you forget there is that there were much, much more pictures being taken. Somebody picked this one and said like, yeah, that's the right image. That's the right Maggie Thatcher. That's the one we want to show, right? And so this is a lot the work you do when you work with these data sources, like is curation, picking, and choosing. And it makes it super subjective. So interesting topic. If you want to learn more about data portraits, Judith Donath has written a really nice paper on, yeah, more about how people are being portrayed, but I think it transfers also to cities or any other phenomenon. Anyways, wrapping up, so you've seen two very different projects, I think. The railway project, very user-centered, very applied. This one, slightly crazy, just playing with technology. Yeah, and you might wonder, well, which one is the better approach, right? Like, or like, what is it saying? Like, what should we do? And I mean, I would say, why choose, right? So I think both approaches can be super valid. You can come from a task-driven perspective, say like, I want to build the ultimate tool to solve a problem, or you can just be inspired by technology and inspired by data sources and sort of see what you can do with it. And ideally, these two approaches help each other, right? And it's the same with visualization and machine learning. So to me, machine learning will never replace, or automatic algorithms will never replace visualization, because the decisions we need to make are always one step more complex than what we can encode in such a system. And machine learning is impossible without visualization. So I think that there can be a love relation between the two. You might have heard the famous quote from Steve Jobs: computer being a bicycle for the mind, like not a brain, replacement, but something that enables us to go faster, but also keep us in shape and exercise us. Maybe with machine learning, it's an e-bike for the mind, but it's still we have to still think ourselves, and it can still enhance our thinking. And just a final thought, what I'm always struck by again and again is it's all still about coping with the digital revolution. So whenever I come to a big organization or a company or something, the fundamental questions are still like, okay, these computers, like, how can we deal with what's going on? Like, everybody, I think, is still in shock. And it's kind of interesting, there was also this Design in Tech report by John Mader. I don't know if you had seen that. So he does a yearly report on what's going on in design. And he says, this year there are 3 kinds of design. Classical design is like the design from industrial revolution, product design. You make one thing, it gets produced 1 million times, and it's perfect. You make once the ultimate coffee blender or whatnot, and then you ship it. Then we had design thinking, and this was big a few years ago, if you remember, we need to think about innovation in general, and transformation in general, and not just think about physical products, but how processes are being shaped, and so on. And so this is this middle part, where people suddenly realized, oh, something is going faster than we can cope with, like what can we do? And design thinking probably came out of that. And now John Mader says the 3rd big wave of design is computational design. He calls it computational design. It could also be called data-driven design or systems design. The term is not so important, but this is this idea that you actually design systems and you actually work with rules and data, and not just design a single thing, but you design processes, right? And I think what's super interesting here is he says the top 10 most critical issues currently facing design are design not having a seat at the table, diversity, ethics, education, and so on, algorithmic bias, dark UX patterns. I think a lot of the things we have touched on today, and a lot of the big trends are also like technically related, like AI and machine learning, new techniques for displaying information, algorithmic design. So how can we actually work effectively with data? And I think the interesting thing is data visualization design has a lot to bring here to the table. These are universal challenges for society and for design specifically. And I think we can actually maybe lead the way there and really like help figure out this digital world together. But we need to connect a bit more, I think, to adjacent fields like user interface design, to the people running the algorithms, and not like just debate if circles or bar charts are better, but really think about the social roles our systems play. But I think there's a big hope where we can play an important role, and we should. So, thank you.
I think you would agree with me that even though we set a high bar, Moritz has met it. And, great talk. Questions? Yes.
Hi. I know the OECD Life Index for a very long time. I really like it. I use it as an example when I work with the social change organizations or with the policy makers and decision makers. And I wanted to ask, do you know if they can update the data, like to upload every year the New Year's numbers, or it's like once a project that they created and that's it?
Maybe I would add to that,
yeah.
As a consultant, working on a project and then stepping away. What is your agency with issues like that, of ongoing maintenance and so on?
Yeah, it's a big challenge actually. In the case of the OECD, they do update every year. So every May they have their big forum and they like updated with new indicators and new data. And they also keep adding languages. So one thing we learned is localization in different languages is super important. And now there's 5 or 6 different languages. The interesting thing is the project started very small, like just a few months of work total, and just like one small website. And then they were like, oh, this is amazing, we should do something with it. And then we started thinking about, okay, how do we establish a sustainable process here? How does this become a bigger platform? But if we had thought about it this way, we would have been caught up in all these meetings and everybody would have decided something and it wouldn't have turned out so clear and concise. So, and the train project is the same. So we flew under the radar for really long. It was never a big deal until it was successful. And this is something that works as a general strategy quite well. Like keep it small and just do something cool. And then if it has wings, it will fly, right? So, and the challenge with the maintenance is tough because I can only like spend so and so much brain power at 24 hours of the day. So I can only have 1 or 2 main projects at a given time. And if something like this runs for years and needs updates, and then I have to think about, okay, how do we manage that? And often I have companies then taking over the stewardship of the project, and I'm just in a consulting role, or maybe not even involved anymore. But with the OECD, we had like 3 or 4 updates where we would add functions and fix usability problems and add data. But then we said we don't want to add anything anymore. We think it's full, it's done. And the client sort of agreed. And so it stayed the same for 2 or 3 years now. But because everybody was like, yeah, we think it's done. So it's a good feeling to have to finally finished.
More questions? Yes. Do you need the mic or can you shout?
When you said that you test alternative of designs, do you include the users or you just pick one of them and just test it, or you do A/B tests?
Yeah, we don't A/B test because in many cases, so for the applied stuff, the user groups are not that big that it would be worth like really splitting them. We do some like plausibility checks while we design, but often it's more, for instance, like on these representations of the different trains, we showed that to the client. But often we also reserve the right to make a judgment call in terms of what the best solution is. So we do produce alternatives, but we don't show all alternatives to the end users. Because in the end, I think you cannot make a lot of micro decisions and like give everything to the end user and hope that if all the micro decisions are made optimally, an amazing design emerges. Because you still need to connect all these micro decisions into a framework that makes sense. And this can only be done by a designer who understands the whole. Otherwise, you cannot decide the local stuff. And so we do ask for a lot of input at the beginning and maybe towards the end, but in the middle, we tend to do our thing and just develop ourselves a good understanding of what works. So it's a bit not so user-centric in the middle of the project.
More questions? I have one. Okay, so you work on a lot of projects that are, all of them are very creative. Some of them are more free than others. Are you still doing like self-initiated projects, like deciding that there's one thing that you want to do and there's no client involved, no commission involved, no money involved, or? If not, when was the last?
That's a good question. I mean, the Paris project, I do get money for it, but I have full freedom. So it's basically just to do whatever you want. Commission, which is fine. So I'll take the money for that. That's good.
Obviously. But you didn't wake up one morning and decided, oh, what am I going to do with Paris now?
Yeah, I did in a way. So I wanted to do something with photos, but that's a very like end cities. And because I did more projects like this, like on Broadway in San City in the past, so I was like, I want to do something with photos again. So that's a very not a very task-centric approach. It's just more like what I would like to do. But I mean, I have done much less experiments, like just playing with data and playing with algorithms than I have done in the past. So I think the first few years of my career, that was probably half of my time, is just playing and see what happens. And now the last few years were much more I don't know, yeah, more dominated by what people want from me, or what where I can prove myself useful. But also the train project, I'm really keen on doing that and proving that it can be done, because I think it's sort of easy if you just do whatever you want and play with interesting data. It's sort of easy to then get a lot of applause on Twitter, but to actually demonstrate actual value in a complex setting, that's for me the next frontier. And so I'm fine with that. But yeah, but then I did also this photo project because probably something was missing. So yeah, there we go.
Yes, over there.
About the train project, how did you know it was successful? Is that like the client loved it, or it was like by numbers you get that you buy it, and how did you know?
Yeah, so what we do is we track
Can you
users.
repeat the question?
Oh yeah, so the question is, how do we know if the train project was successful? And there's two aspects to it. So we do track users, like actually count how many hours do people spend in the tool. And it was rolled out just as a prototype, poor documentation, very bare bones, and we have like dozens of people spending an hour or two a day with the tool consistently. So that's quite amazing, given that it's a very niche topic even for the Deutsche Bank. And the other thing is we do actually also do qualitative feedback in terms of we ask individual user groups, like representative people from all user groups, how do you use the tool? How have you done this task before? How does it help you? Are there any things you would like to have improved? So we try to combine both quantitative and qualitative feedback and really make that a core part of the process. And what we learned is also we had so many ideas for new features like tagging and starring and sending trains to other colleagues and more data. And what we learned also from the feedback is mostly, we have enough features, we just need to communicate the features better and maybe make things a bit more compartmentalized depending on which role you have. So very simple, much less like cool stuff, but just homework we have to do. And so that's something we would have neglected if we hadn't talked so much to the actual users. But also some things people are not aware themselves, so we, like the search, like that some people just use the search. They never use anything else, they don't click, they just type in the train numbers. And there's something they wouldn't tell us because for them it was so clear that's how I work, right? But it's not so that only showed up in the data, that some people have this extreme like center on the train numbers, and others are much more mouse people, I guess.
So, any more questions? Because I have one small one.
There's one.
Oh, another one. Yeah, great.